In the gilded cage of Sterling Point, cruelty wasn't just a pastime for the rich. It was a currency, a language of power. And no one spoke it more fluently than Tristan Devereaux, the 15-year-old princeling to a billion-dollar empire. He saw the world as his playground and its people as his toys, especially Alara Vance, the family's maid. To him, she was less than human, an object to be tormented for a few fleeting likes on his social media feed. Tonight, for the amusement of his parents and their sneering friends, he would demand more than just her labor. He would demand her soul. He would force her to eat from a dog bowl on the cold marble floor. But what Tristan didn't know, what none of them could possibly comprehend, was that beneath the quiet dignity they sought to shatter, a fire was being kindled. And by morning, their entire world would be engulfed in its flames. Before this story goes any further, I need you to do two things. Hit that subscribe button and comment below where you're watching from. You're not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. Alara's arms burned as she navigated the crowded ballroom, the heavy sterling silver tray laden with champagne flutes feeling like a lead weight. For 15 straight hours, she had been on her feet, a silent ghost polishing, preparing, and serving for the Devereaux' annual gala pre-party. The crystal chandeliers, worth more than her entire life's earnings, cast a cold, fractured light on the faces of Sterling Point's elite. They were a flock of peacocks in bespoke suits and designer gowns, their laughter sharp and brittle as they gossiped and drank, utterly oblivious to the invisible army that catered to their every whim. Her back was a column of fire, and the cheap insoles she'd bought couldn't stop the throbbing in her feet, but Alara's face remained a mask of placid neutrality. It was the first rule of survival in this house: show nothing, feel nothing, disappear into the wallpaper. "Another bottle over here, Mother." Tristan Devereaux's voice, already laced with the arrogance of inherited power, sliced through the air. He lounged on a velvet settee, his prep school blazer carelessly tossed aside, his thumbs flying across his smartphone screen. He hadn't made eye contact with a single servant all night. Genevieve Devereaux, a woman sculpted from ice and diamonds, offered her son an indulgent smile. "In a moment, darling. Perhaps you could ask Alara to pass the canapes to the Athertons first. They look famished." Alara moved with practiced grace, offering the tray of intricate appetizers. As she approached Tristan's settee, he suddenly stretched his leg out, a deliberate, lazy motion. She stumbled, the tray tilting violently. With a gasp, she managed to right it, but not before several glasses of champagne cascaded onto the priceless Aubusson rug. A collective titter went through the nearby guests. "Oh dear, clumsy," Tristan said, not even looking up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "Tristan, sweetheart, don't tease the help," Genevieve chided, but her tone was laced with amusement, not reproof. Alara's cheeks burned with a shame so hot it felt like a brand. She knelt, blotting the spilled champagne with a linen napkin, her movements quick and efficient. As she rose, she saw him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus Thorne, the new groundskeeper, methodically pruning the white roses that lined the terrace. He paused, his gaze meeting hers for a brief, electric moment. There was no pity in his eyes, but something else. A quiet, steady anger that seemed to mirror her own. It was enough to still the trembling in her hands. "I'm bored," Tristan announced, finally pocketing his phone and standing up. "This party is a drag. It needs a performance." His cold eyes settled on Alara, and a cruel, familiar gleam lit them from within. It was the look he got right before he did something truly awful. "Hey, I have an idea. Alara, come here." A knot of ice formed in Alara's stomach. She approached him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew this was more than a simple request. It was a prelude to degradation. "I saw this hilarious video online," Tristan said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "A real viral sensation. I want to recreate it." He picked up a small, ornate porcelain bowl from a side table, one usually reserved for potpourri. He scooped a handful of expensive beluga caviar from a serving dish and dumped it into the bowl. He set it on the floor. "Get on your hands and knees," he commanded. The chatter in the room died. A thick, expectant silence fell. Ilara froze, the blood draining from her face. I'm sorry, Master Tristan." "You heard me, on the floor, like a good little doggy." His grin widened as he pulled out his phone, aiming its camera at her. "This is going to get me 1,000,000 views." "Tristan, I don't think," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. "Do it," he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing undertone. "Or I'll tell my father you were the one who broke that Ming vase in the study last week. You know what happens to servants who cost us money, don't you?" Ilara's throat closed. She did know. She'd seen a kitchen porter fired and thrown out with no references for dropping a plate. She couldn't lose this job. Her sister's medical bills were a mountain of debt she was slowly, painfully chipping away at. "Now," Tristan ordered, his phone recording her every flicker of hesitation. "Eat it, from the bowl, no hands." Every eye in the room was on her. She could feel their smug, curious stares like physical blows. Genevieve Devereaux simply took a delicate sip of her wine, a silent, smiling spectator at the Colosseum. No one spoke up. No one moved to help. They were all waiting for the show to begin. With a shudder that racked her entire body, Ilara lowered herself to the cold, polished marble floor. The stone was unforgiving beneath her knees. Shame, corrosive and absolute, burned through her veins. Tears pricked her eyes as she crawled the final few feet to the bowl. The salty, fishy smell of the caviar filled her nostrils, making her want to gag. "Oh, this is priceless," one of the women shrieked with laughter. "Tristan, you are a riot." "Look at her face," another guest howled, pulling out his own phone. "She's so pathetic." Through the shimmering blur of her unshed tears, Ilara saw Marcus again. He had moved closer to the windows, partially concealed by a large marble statue. He wasn't pruning anymore. His own phone was out, held steady, the small red light of its recording function a tiny beacon in her sea of humiliation. He wasn't laughing. His face was a mask of cold fury, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. He was documenting it. He was a witness. "Come on, get a good shot," Tristan urged, circling her like a predator. "Maybe you should wag your tail a little. Pretend you're enjoying your treat." More gales of laughter echoed off the high, frescoed ceilings. Ilara's body shook uncontrollably as she leaned forward, forcing herself to lower her head to the bowl. The act of eating felt like swallowing shards of glass, each one shredding another piece of her soul. Her uniform was soiled, her knees ached, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of her own debasement. It felt hard to breathe, as if the very air in the opulent room was too thin for her lungs. "Now lick the bowl clean," Tristan commanded, zooming in for a close-up. "Like a good girl." The laughter intensified, a cacophony of cruelty that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. Still on her hands and knees, Ilara caught Marcus's eye one last time. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a promise of rescue. It was a promise of reckoning. And somehow, in the depths of her despair, that knowledge gave her the strength to endure the unendurable, to lick the bowl clean as the flashes of their cameras went off around her like 1,000 tiny explosions, each one capturing the death of her dignity. Ilara sat on the cold stone steps of the service entrance, the chilly night air doing little to cool the fire of shame that still consumed her. The muffled sounds of laughter and music from the party were a constant, tormenting reminder of what had just happened. She stared at her own hands, raw and scraped from the marble floor, and silent tears finally traced paths through the dust on her cheeks. The scent of roses hung in the air, a beautiful fragrance that felt like a mockery. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path behind her. Elara hastily wiped her eyes, her training kicking in. Never let them see you weak. But it was only Marcus, his approach slow and deliberate, as if not to startle a wounded animal. "Miss Vance," his voice was low and gentle. "May I sit with you?" She could only nod, pulling her knees closer to her chest. He sat on the step below, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the crickets and the distant party. "What they did to you in there?" Marcus finally said, his voice tight with a rage he was barely containing. "That wasn't just wrong. That was a crime." A bitter, broken sound that might have been a laugh escaped Elara's lips. "A crime? In Sterling Point? The Devereaux own the law here. They own the whole town." "They might own the town," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "But they don't own the truth. And they don't own you." He took out his phone and, after a few taps, turned the screen toward her. "I filmed the whole thing." Elara's breath hitched. She took the phone with trembling hands. The video was shockingly clear, filmed through the clean glass of the terrace window. It showed everything: Tristan's smug commands, the guests' cruel laughter, and her own agonizing humiliation. Watching it felt like reliving the nightmare, but this time it was through a different lens, not of a victim, but of a witness. "I used to be a corporate lawyer," Marcus said softly, "before I got tired of defending monsters like them. But I still know the law. What you have there is evidence of assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a dozen workplace violations. With this, we could destroy them." "We could what?" Elara's voice was hollow. "Go to Sheriff Brody? He has brunch with Mr. Devereaux every Sunday at the country club. File a lawsuit? Their lawyers would bury me in motions until I couldn't afford to breathe. They'd make it go away. They always do." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense and compelling. "Then we don't go through their channels. We go over them. We go to state agencies. We go to federal investigators. We go to the national media. This isn't just about one party, Elara. This is about a pattern of behavior, a system of corruption. And sometimes all it takes is one spark to burn down the entire rotten forest." She looked at his face, searching for the catch, for the angle. But all she saw was a fierce, unwavering sincerity. "Why? Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered simply. "And because I've spent the last 3 years of my life watching people like the Devereaux get away with everything, while good people get crushed. I'm tired of watching." He pulled a small, worn notebook and a pen from his pocket. "We start by documenting everything. Every threat, every unpaid hour of overtime, every demeaning comment. We build a timeline. We get statements from other staff members. We build a case so strong, so airtight, that no one can ignore it." For the first time all night, a tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in Elara's chest. "The kitchen staff," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maria and Jorge, they've seen things, and Chloe, the maid before me. She was fired after Tristan accused her of stealing his watch. I know for a fact he'd just misplaced it." Marcus nodded, his pen scratching rapidly across the page. "Perfect. We'll need their testimony. We'll also need your employment contract, pay stubs, anything you have in writing." "I have them at home," Elara said. "But if we do this, they'll come after us. They'll make sure none of us ever find work again. They'll ruin us." That's why we have to be strategic, Marcus explained, his voice taking on the cool precision of a lawyer laying out a case. We gather our evidence in secret. We build our coalition quietly. And then we release it all at once, to everyone, everywhere. A flood they can't possibly contain. Retaliation will just be another nail in their coffin. He showed her how to transfer his video to her phone and create multiple encrypted backups in the cloud. They spent the next hour in the cool night air, their hushed voices weaving a plan of attack as the oblivious laughter of the partygoers continued inside. First thing tomorrow, I'll reach out to some old contacts, Marcus said. A few journalists and lawyers who still have a conscience. We have to move fast before they have a chance to cover their tracks. Ilara nodded, her phone clutched in her hand. The video felt like a weapon, a shield, a ticking bomb. I should go. My sister will be waiting up. Marcus stood as she did. Be careful. When you go in tomorrow, act like nothing's changed. And if anything else happens, you call me immediately. He wrote his number on a page from his notebook and tore it out for her. You're not in this alone anymore, Ilara. She tucked the paper into her pocket as if it were a precious jewel. Thank you, Marcus, for seeing me. We'll see this through, he said, his gaze firm. Just remember, document everything and watch your back. As Ilara walked to her car in the distant, unlit staff parking lot, the phone in her hand felt heavy with the weight of the future. But her heart, for the first time in a very long time, felt a little bit lighter. The shame was still there, a raw and tender wound, but now it was joined by something else, something fierce and new. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a fighter. The morning sun cast long, imposing shadows from the granite columns of the Sterling Point police station. Ilara's knuckles were white on the steering wheel of her beat-up sedan. Marcus's truck was already parked near the entrance, and he stood waiting, a worn leather briefcase in his hand, looking more like a lawyer than a gardener. You ready for this? He asked, his calm demeanor a welcome anchor for her frayed nerves. Ilara took a deep, shaky breath and smoothed down the simple, professional dress she'd chosen. As I'll ever be. The station smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. A portly sergeant with a bored expression glanced up from his crossword puzzle. Help you? We're here to file a report, Marcus stated, his voice professional and firm, regarding an assault and workplace harassment incident at the Devereaux estate. The sergeant's bored expression vanished, replaced by a subtle, guarded watchfulness. His eyes flicked from Marcus to Ilara, assessing them. Have a seat over there. Officer Kent will be with you. The plastic chairs were hard and cold. Ilara's leg bounced with a nervous energy she couldn't control as they waited. 20 long minutes later, a young, clean-cut officer with a nameplate that read, Kent, emerged. This way, he said, his tone clipped, leading them to a sterile, windowless interview room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor on everything. Officer Kent sat opposite them, notepad at the ready. Okay, what's this all about? Ilara's mouth was dry. Last night, at a party at the Devereaux mansion, I was forced by their son, Tristan, to eat food out of a bowl on the floor like an animal, while he and their guests filmed and laughed at me. Her voice trembled on the last words. Kent's eyebrows shot up, but his face remained impassive. And you are? Ilara Vance. I'm a maid for the Devereaux family. I see, Kent said, scribbling a note. And why exactly did you do this? He ordered me to. He threatened my job if I refused. Mr. and Mrs. Devereaux were there. They did nothing to stop it. They encouraged it. That's a very serious accusation, Miss Vance, Kent said, his tone implying he didn't believe a word of it. Were there any other witnesses? I have video evidence, Marcus interjected, placing his phone on the metal table. I recorded the entire incident. Kent played the video. The small room filled with the sounds of jeering laughter and Ilara's profound humiliation. When it was over, Kent cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. Well, Miss Vance, while this is unfortunate, I'm not sure I see a crime here. Not see a crime? Ilara began, her voice rising, but Marcus placed a calming hand on her arm. Officer Kent, Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. What you just witnessed is clear evidence of assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the creation of a hostile work environment, all of which are violations of state and federal law. Kent leaned back in his chair, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. And you are? Marcus Thorne. I'm representing Miss Vance. You a lawyer, Mr. Thorne? I used to be. Now I'm the Devereaux's gardener. A smirk touched Kent's lips. Then you should know this is a civil matter. You're wasting police time. This is far more than a civil matter, Marcus pressed, his jaw tight. The video shows a misunderstanding at a private party, Kent interrupted, his voice turning hard. Looks to me like she was playing along. We have more important things to do than settle squabbles between rich folks and their help. If you have a complaint, take it up with her employer. Anger, hot and sharp, pierced through Ilara's fear. They treated me like I was garbage. They filmed it for fun. Lower your voice, ma'am, Kent warned. Look, I know the Devereaux. They are pillars of this community. They donate to the Police Benevolent Fund. They built the new wing on the hospital. Are you sure you're not just blowing a little hazing out of proportion? Maybe trying to get a payday? The insult stung more than the humiliation itself. Before she could respond, the door swung open, and a tall, imposing man with a sheriff's star on his chest entered. Sheriff Brody's face was a mask of stern authority. Everything okay in here, Kent? Yes, sir. Just wrapping up a frivolous complaint. Brody's gaze landed on Ilara, and a chill went down her spine. Miss Vance, is it? Funnily enough, Richard Devereaux called me this morning. Mentioned there was some confusion over a party game last night. Said you might be feeling a little embarrassed. They had already gotten to him. Of course they had. Now listen, Brody continued, his voice dripping with condescending paternalism. I understand you might feel your pride was hurt, but filing a false report against a respected family like the Devereaux, well, that's a serious offense. Perjury, defamation. It could get very ugly for you. Marcus stood up slowly. Are you threatening my client, Sheriff? Brody's smile was thin and cold. Just giving some friendly, fatherly advice. Sterling Point is a good, quiet town. We don't like troublemakers. He reached for Marcus's phone on the table. Let's see this famous video. Before Marcus could react, Brody had the phone in his thick hands. He fumbled with it for a moment, his brow furrowed. Huh. Damn thing seems to be broken. File's not opening. Corrupted, I guess. He placed the phone back on the table. Modern technology. Can't rely on it. Ilara's heart plunged. She checked her own phone. The file was gone. Wiped clean. Well, Brody said, his voice falsely cheerful. Seeing as there's no evidence of any wrongdoing, I'd say we're done here. Kent, show these fine people out. He paused at the door, his eyes locking on Ilara. His voice dropped to a low growl. And Miss Vance? I'd be very, very careful about where you go from here. Next time you try to make trouble, it might not end with just some friendly advice. The walk out of the station was a walk of shame. The bright morning sun seemed to mock them. I'm sorry, Ilara, Marcus said as they reached their vehicles. I should have known. I should have made more backups. It's not your fault, she said, her voice numb. It's the whole system. They own it all. This isn't over, Marcus vowed, his eyes burning with a renewed fire. They just showed us how scared they really are." Ilara drove home in a daze, the sheriff's threat echoing in her ears. As she pulled up to her small apartment complex, she saw her sister waiting on the curb, a box of belongings at her feet, tears streaming down her face. Her sister's boss had just fired her, effective immediately, after getting a call from a prominent local business owner. The retaliation had begun. Later that night, as they sat in the dark, trying to figure out what to do, an unmarked number called Ilara's phone. She answered, and a distorted computerized voice spoke 2 chilling words before the line went dead. "You're next." Dawn had not yet broken when Ilara pulled her Honda into the service drive of the Devereaux estate. The anonymous threat, "You're next," had played on a loop in her mind all night. The mansion, usually a symbol of opulent beauty, now loomed like a gothic monster in the pre-dawn gloom. She wasn't here to work. She was here to retrieve her last paycheck and her personal effects from her locker before disappearing. Staying in Sterling Point was no longer an option. She let herself in through the kitchen entrance. The vast, stainless steel space was dark and silent, smelling faintly of yesterday's feast. Her footsteps were unnervingly loud on the marble tiles. She needed to get her things from the staff locker room and leave before anyone else arrived. In the small locker room, she quickly filled a duffel bag with her spare uniform, a worn-out pair of sneakers, and the few personal items she kept there. Taped to the inside of the door was a picture of her and her sister, smiling on a rare day off at the beach. She carefully peeled it off and tucked it into her wallet. As she was about to close the locker for the last time, she heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. The kitchen staff was arriving early. Panic seized her. She couldn't face their questions, their pity, or worse, their fear. Her eyes darted to a heavy wooden door at the far end of the hall, the entrance to the basement. It was a sprawling labyrinth of storage rooms and utility tunnels, but she knew it had another exit that led out to the far side of the gardens. It was her only way out without being seen. She slipped through the door and down the cold concrete steps. The air in the basement was cool and damp, the only light coming from a few humming fluorescent tubes. She moved quickly past the laundry rooms and wine cellars when a sliver of light from under a door caught her eye. It was a door she'd always been told was off-limits, the door to Mr. Devereaux's private basement office. And it was slightly ajar. Every instinct screamed at her to keep moving, to get out. But something, a reckless curiosity, a desperate need for a weapon in this one-sided war, pulled her toward it. She peered through the crack. The office was richly furnished, a stark contrast to the rest of the utilitarian basement. A massive mahogany desk was littered with files and documents, and the screen of a large computer monitor was still glowing. Someone had forgotten to log off. Her heart hammering, Ilara pushed the door open and slipped inside. This was insane, but she was past caring. The desk was a chaotic landscape of corporate greed. One open folder contained payroll records. Her eyes widened as she scanned the names. The numbers were double what she and the other staff members were actually paid. The Devereaux were paying them one salary and reporting a much higher one to the IRS, pocketing the difference. It was systematic, large-scale tax fraud. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and began taking pictures. Bank statements detailed wire transfers to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. A series of letters outlined consulting fees paid to local politicians, including Mayor Thompson, for favorable zoning changes. A detailed spreadsheet listed dozens of undocumented workers on their construction sites, all paid cash, all well below minimum wage, their silence guaranteed by threats of deportation. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Ilara froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had to hurry. She photographed everything she could find. A ledger labeled Sterling Point Development showed how the Devereaux had used insider information and bribes to buy up land from struggling families for pennies on the dollar before a new highway was announced. Another file detailed a blackmail scheme against a rival businessman, complete with secretly recorded videos. This wasn't just greed. This was an entire ecosystem of corruption, blackmail, and exploitation that held the whole town in its grip. This was why Sheriff Brody was in their pocket. This was why everyone was so terrified of them. A door slammed upstairs, jolting her back to reality. With frantic precision, she put every paper back exactly where she had found it. She closed the office door, leaving it just ajar, and fled through the dark tunnels of the basement. She emerged from the garden-level exit into the pale morning light, blinking like a creature of the dark. Her pulse was a drum solo in her ears as she walked, trying to look casual toward the main gates. She saw Marcus near the rose gardens, shears in hand. He saw the look on her face and immediately set down his tools, meeting her by the wrought iron fence. "Ilara, what happened? I've been trying to call you." She pulled him away from the gate, out of sight of the mansion's security cameras. "I found it, Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling as she showed him the photos on her phone. "In a secret office, in the basement. It's worse than we thought. It's so much worse." Marcus's face grew grimmer with each photo he swiped through. The calm gardener was gone, replaced by the sharp, analytical lawyer. "My God," he breathed. This is racketeering. This is Ryko-level corruption." "They're stealing from everyone," Ilara said, a new, cold anger solidifying in her gut. "They're workers, the city, the federal government, and they're using the money to buy off anyone who could stop them." "This is why Brody shut us down so fast," Marcus muttered, his mind clearly racing. "The Devereaux don't just have him on the payroll, they probably have enough dirt on him to end his career. They have everyone." A luxury car purred to a stop at the front of the mansion. Mr. Devereaux was leaving for the day. "You need to get out of here now," Marcus said urgently. "If they even suspect you found this, they won't just threaten you, Ilara." She was already moving toward her car, the phone in her hand feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. It was terrifying, but it was also leverage. The Devereaux had built their empire on secrets and fear, and she was holding all their secrets in the palm of her hand. "What do we do?" she asked him as she fumbled for her car keys. His eyes were hard, focused, and more determined than she had ever seen them. The humble gardener had vanished completely. In his place stood a warrior. "They've declared war, Ilara," he said. "So we give them one." The small kitchen in Marcus's rented bungalow became their war room. Photos from Ilara's phone were printed and spread across the table, a constellation of corruption. For hours, they pieced together the Devereaux' criminal network, creating a detailed map of their influence and a list of their victims. "Jorge Martinez," Ilara said, pointing to a name on one of the fraudulent payroll sheets. "He's worked as a cook at the mansion for 10 years. According to this, they're paying him half of what they report, and threatening to have his family in Mexico investigated by the authorities if he ever speaks up." Marcus typed furiously into a battered laptop. "He's not alone. There are dozens of workers in the same position. We have to reach them. But one wrong move and the Devereaux will know what we're up to." Ilara scrolled through the contacts on her phone. "I trust Maria from the kitchen. She's quiet, but she sees everything. And she has a cousin who was one of the undocumented workers on their last construction project. They paid him half what they promised, and fired him when he got injured." They began a careful, clandestine outreach. Ilara sent encrypted messages, arranging to meet trusted co-workers at a laundromat on the far side of town. Marcus used his position as gardener to slip notes to the grounds crew and other outdoor staff. By sunset, they had secured meetings with 6 other employees at a small, family-owned restaurant miles from Sterling Point. Maria was the first to arrive, her eyes darting nervously around the restaurant. "The things they do," she whispered, sliding into their booth. "Last week, Mrs. Devereaux threw a plate of food at my head because the soup was too cold. When I cried, Mr. Devereaux told me if I didn't stop, he'd make one phone call and my brother would be deported. One by one, others arrived. Housekeepers, valets, maintenance workers. Each brought a story of wage theft, verbal abuse, racism, and threats. Marcus recorded their statements on a small, discreet audio recorder, while Alara took detailed notes, cross-referencing their stories with the documents she'd photographed. "We have to be strategic," Marcus told the small, fearful group. "They have the power and the money, but we have the truth. If we all speak at once, they can't silence all of us." "I have photos," whispered a young valet named Leo, "of the politicians and the police chief coming for late-night meetings at the mansion. They always leave with thick envelopes." They were so engrossed in their work that none of them noticed the man sitting alone in a corner booth, pretending to read a newspaper while he covertly snapped photos of the meeting with his phone. He paid his bill in cash and left quickly, driving straight to the Devereaux estate. An hour later, Alara's phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. "They know. Someone saw us. Mr. Devereaux is on a rampage." The retaliation was swift and brutal. The next morning, a story appeared on a local gossip website, accusing Alara of being a disgruntled employee fired for theft, complete with a fabricated confession from a former co-worker. Her social media was flooded with hateful comments. Her phone rang with blocked numbers, each one playing a recording of her own terrified voice from Tristan's video, followed by laughter. When she finally picked one up, Genevieve Devereaux's voice, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, hissed in her ear. "You pathetic little roach, we will squash you. You will lose everything." Exhausted and terrified, Alara drove back to her apartment that night, only to find 2 police cars, lights flashing, parked in front of her building. Her landlord stood there with Officer Kent, the cop from the station. "Miss Vance," the landlord said, avoiding her eyes, "I'm afraid I have to serve you with an eviction notice. We have reason to believe you've been engaged in illegal activities on the premises." "What? That's a lie!" she protested, but Kent stepped forward, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "You have 30 minutes to gather your personal belongings," the landlord mumbled, his face pale. "Then the locks are being changed." Shaking, Alara called Marcus. He was there in 10 minutes, helping her frantically throw clothes and essentials into trash bags and boxes. "They're trying to break you," he said, his jaw tight as he carried a box to his truck. "Isolate you, make you feel like you have nothing left to lose." "It's working," she whispered, her hands pulling clothes from her closet without even seeing them. Her home, her reputation, her sister's job, all gone. "You can stay with me," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I have a guest room. They want you alone. We won't let them win." They loaded his truck with what little they could carry. Alara took one last look at the apartment she had worked so hard for, now a chaotic mess of things she had to leave behind. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Maria. "Don't give up. We are with you. 5 more people want to talk." In Marcus's truck, Alara scrolled through the smear campaign. The articles were vicious, painting her as a manipulative con artist. The comments were even worse. The Devereaux's PR machine was working overtime to utterly destroy her credibility before she could speak. "They think this will shut me up," Alara said, her voice shaking but hardening with a new resolve. "They're wrong. All this does is prove how much they have to hide." Marcus drove through the dark streets, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. "They've tipped their hand," he said. "They're terrified of what we know. We have to move faster." At his small bungalow, they unloaded her bags into the spare room. It was simple, but clean and safe. Surrounded by the wreckage of her life packed into garbage bags, Alara finally broke down. the stress and fear of the last 48 hours overwhelming her. But as Marcus stood quietly in the doorway, giving her space, her sobs slowly subsided, replaced by a cold, burning anger. "They think they can do this to anyone who challenges them," she said, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "That's how they've gotten away with it for so long. But they messed with the wrong people this time." Marcus nodded, his expression grim but proud. "Get some sleep, Ilara. Tomorrow the real fight begins." The air in Marcus's small living room was thick with coffee, fear, and a fragile, burgeoning hope. 7 other workers were crowded around the kitchen table, their faces etched with anxiety, but also with a defiant resolve. "They're trying to pick us off one by one," Ilara said, her voice clear and steady as she stood before them. "They think if they make an example of me, the rest of you will be too scared to talk. We have to prove them wrong." Maria nodded, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. "They suspended Jorge from the kitchen today. Made up a story about him stealing food. Everyone knows it's because he met with us." "We can't meet in public anymore," Marcus stated, spreading a map of Sterling Point on the table. "We need safe houses, places they won't think to look." Leo, the young valet, pointed to a spot on the outskirts of town. "My grandmother's church. The basement is always open. Pastor John would help us. He hates the Devereaux." Ilara circled the church on the map. Her phone, now a cheap burner she'd bought for cash, buzzed with encrypted messages from more workers, each one a new thread in the vast tapestry of the Devereaux' cruelty. "What about the proof?" asked a housekeeper named Rosa. "They're probably shredding documents as we speak." "That's why we need digital and physical copies of everything you have," Marcus said, pointing to his laptop. "Pay stubs, schedules, photos of safety violations. I've set up a secure, anonymous cloud server. They can't trace it." The group spent the next hour mapping out a strategy. They became a clandestine network, a secret army of the invisible. They used code words, dead drops, and burner phones, communicating like spies in a high-stakes thriller. Marcus taught them how to spot tails and how to document abuse without getting caught. "Remember," Ilara stressed, her confidence growing with every person who pledged their support. "We need evidence of a pattern. Dates, times, who was there. Every detail makes our case stronger." Late that morning, after the others had left in staggered intervals, Ilara sat at the table, staring at her phone. There was one more person she had to call, a contact from her life before Sterling Point, a life she had tried to forget. "You sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked, seeing the conflict in her eyes. She nodded. "Vanessa and I used to be inseparable. She's an investigative journalist now, a damn good one. She lives to take down people like the Devereaux. If anyone can get this story out, it's her." Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number. A voice she hadn't heard in 5 years answered on the second ring. "Ilara? My God, is that you? I saw those disgusting articles online. I knew they weren't true." "Vanessa, I need your help," Ilara said, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm in trouble, but I have a story that could change everything." There was a beat of silence. "I'm on the next flight." When Vanessa Morgan arrived, Marcus's bungalow transformed into a newsroom. With her laptop, recorders, and satellite phone, she was a one-woman media blitz. Her professional skepticism melted into righteous fury as Ilara and Marcus laid out the mountain of evidence and testimony they had gathered. "This is explosive," Vanessa whispered, her eyes wide as she scrolled through the photos of the fraudulent documents. Wage theft, blackmail, tax evasion, a slush fund for bribing officials. And that video of you, Ilara, Jesus. "We have nearly 40 workers willing to go on the record, anonymously," Marcus explained. "But the Devereaux are already retaliating. We need to get this out before they silence everyone." Vanessa's fingers were a blur on her keyboard. My network will want to independently verify everything. We'll need to do this by the book, get legal to sign off. She looked at Alara, her expression serious. To do this right, to make it bulletproof, it could take a week, maybe more. People are losing their homes and their jobs now, Alara insisted, her voice pleading. We don't have a week. I know. Vanessa reached out, her hand covering Alara's. But if we go public too soon, their army of lawyers will pick it apart and discredit the entire thing. We get one shot at this, Alara. We have to make it count. They spent the rest of the day and deep into the night creating a battle plan. Vanessa would begin her verification process, using her resources to dig into the Devereaux's corporate structure and financial history. Alara and Marcus would continue gathering testimonies, building their case file. We'll film interviews with everyone, Vanessa planned. In silhouette with their voices disguised, we protect our sources at all costs. Marcus set up a triple encrypted communication channel between the three of them. The energy in the room was electric, a fusion of fear and exhilarating purpose. Vanessa's journalistic rigor helped them shape their raw data into a compelling, undeniable narrative of systemic corruption. We need to show the world who the Devereaux really are, she said, her eyes blazing. Not the philanthropists they pretend to be, but predators who have been bleeding this community dry for decades. Alara stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the quiet suburban street. For the first time since Tristan Devereaux had ordered her to the floor, she felt a flicker of real power. It wasn't the power of money or influence. It was the power of truth, of solidarity. We're going to burn it all down, she said softly. Not with malice, but with the conviction of someone who had seen the darkness and was no longer afraid of the light. Vanessa packed her gear, promising to work around the clock. I'll feed this to some trusted colleagues at the national level, she said. When this story breaks, it's going to be a firestorm. The Devereaux won't know what hit them. After she left, Marcus found Alara still by the window. You built an army, Alara, he said quietly. She turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. For days, she had felt like a ghost, a victim. But looking at the maps and lists and files spread across the room, she knew what she was now. She was a general. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. She knew the Devereaux's next move would be even more vicious. But she wasn't alone anymore. They had a plan, they had an army, and they had the truth. The morning of the broadcast, the air in Marcus's bungalow crackled with a nervous energy that was almost unbearable. In a few short hours, Vanessa's exposé, the Sterling Point scandal, was set to air on a national news network. Their carefully constructed bombshell was ready to detonate. The security guard at the WBRG news station waved Alara through. She had been here before, in a secret, late-night session, to record her own on-camera testimony with Vanessa. The newsroom was a hive of activity, but as Alara walked toward Vanessa's office, she sensed something was terribly wrong. People were avoiding her eyes. Producers were whispering in hushed, urgent tones. She found Vanessa at her desk, her face pale, her hands shaking. Her normally immaculate office was in disarray. Come in, Vanessa said, her voice a dead whisper. Shut the door. Alara's heart began to pound, a sick, heavy rhythm. Vanessa, what's going on? The segment airs in an hour. Vanessa held up her phone, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and defeat. The screen showed a gallery of photos. Her two young children playing in their schoolyard, a red laser dot photoshopped onto each of their chests, her elderly parents' confidential medical records, a doctored bank statement showing a large deposit from a known criminal organization. They know everything, Alara, Vanessa choked out. Every source we have, every piece of evidence. She took a shuddering breath. The station owner called me an hour ago. He got a call directly from Richard Devereaux. If the story airs, my career is over. My husband's firm will be audited into bankruptcy. And those pictures, they made it very clear what would happen to my kids." "The Devereaux," Alara breathed, collapsing into a chair. "It's not just them," Vanessa said, her voice cracking. "They have connections everywhere. The network's parent company, one of their biggest investors, is a shell corporation owned by the Devereaux. They own a piece of everything. The media, the banks, everything." She swept a hand helplessly over her desk. "They pulled the segment. Corporate security is on their way down to confiscate all my files and wipe my hard drive." "We can't let them do this," Alara pleaded, her voice desperate. "We have proof. We have dozens of witnesses." "They don't care about proof." Vanessa stood and began to pace like a caged animal. "They care about power, and they have all of it." She stopped, her eyes swimming with tears. "I'm sorry, Alara. I thought I was tough enough. But my family, I can't." "I understand," Alara said, her own hopes turning to ash in her mouth. "Of course, your family comes first." Maybe you should stop too," Vanessa whispered. "They won't stop. They'll ruin you. They'll ruin everyone." Alara shook her head slowly, standing on legs that felt like jelly. "That's why I can't stop," she said. "Because if they can do this to you, a respected journalist, what chance does anyone else have?" She walked out of the office in a stupor. The drive back to Marcus's bungalow was a blur. She felt a profound, soul-crushing despair. They had fought so hard, been so careful, but their enemy's tentacles reached further than they could have ever imagined. As she turned onto Marcus's street, her blood ran cold. Thick black smoke was billowing into the sky. Her heart leaped into her throat as she saw it. His little bungalow was engulfed in flames. Fire trucks and police cars blocked the road. She abandoned her car and ran, pushing past a firefighter who tried to stop her. "Marcus! Marcus!" "Alara!" a voice called from behind her. She spun around to see him sitting in the back of an ambulance, his face black with soot, a bloody bandage wrapped around his forearm. She ran to him, relief and horror warring within her. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I was in the backyard," he said, his voice raspy from the smoke. "I heard a window break. By the time I got to the front of the house, it was already going up. I saw a black sedan speeding away, no license plate." He coughed, a deep rattling sound. "The fire chief said they found traces of accelerant. It was arson." Alara looked at the smoldering ruins of the house, their command center, all their printed files, their notes, the physical evidence. "It's all gone," she whispered. "Not all of it." Marcus reached into the pocket of his soot-stained jeans and pulled out a small metallic flash drive. "I always keep a backup of the most critical files on me. But Alara?" He gripped her hand, his eyes dark with a new level of fear. "This is a message. They're done with threats. Next time it won't be a house." A police car pulled up, and Officer Kent got out. He smirked as he walked past them, not even bothering to ask if they were okay. He was already writing his report. Faulty wiring, accidental fire. "I'm sorry," Alara sobbed, the guilt overwhelming her. "This is all my fault. I got you into this." "No." Marcus's voice was surprisingly strong. "You reminded me what's worth fighting for." He stood up, shaking off a paramedic who tried to help him. "I ran away from this fight once before when I quit my job. I won't run again." They watched as the firefighters doused the last of the flames. The morning's defeat was absolute. Their media ally was silenced, their evidence destroyed, and now, this violent, unmistakable warning. But as Marcus stood beside her, his home a pile of black rubble, his resolve unshaken, Alara knew that surrender was not an option. "They think this will break us," she said, her voice low and hard. "They think fire and fear are their most powerful weapons." "Woke," She looked from the ruined house to Marcus's determined face. They have no idea what we're going to do next. The Starlight Motel, with its flickering neon sign and peeling paint, felt a world away from the manicured lawns of Sterling Point. In their small, anonymous room, Marcus paced restlessly while Ilara sat on the edge of a lumpy mattress, staring at the flash drive in her hand. It was all they had left. "They're escalating," Marcus said, his voice grim. "The fire, silencing Vanessa. They're closing ranks. They're no longer trying to hide what they're doing." Ilara nodded, her mind numb. "Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe we should just run." Just then, the cheap burner phone on the nightstand jangled, its shrill ring making them both jump. They had given the number to no one. Marcus answered it cautiously, putting it on speaker. "Is this Marcus Thorne?" The voice on the other end was quiet, educated, and saturated with fear. "My name is Alistair Finch, Alistair. I was the chief financial officer at Devereaux Industries until 6 months ago. I need to meet with you and Miss Vance, immediately." Ilara and Marcus exchanged a look of disbelief and suspicion. Alistair Finch was a ghost. He had abruptly resigned and vanished from public life, with rumors swirling about a nervous breakdown. "How did you get this number?" Marcus asked, his tone wary. "From Maria in the kitchen staff. I've kept in touch with a few people. Please, I know about the fire. I know they killed the story. I can help you, but you have to meet me. Tonight. I'm not safe here." "This could be a trap," Ilara whispered. Marcus nodded. "Mr. Finch, why should we believe you?" There was a shaky sigh on the other end of the line. "Because I spent 15 years helping Richard Devereaux build his criminal empire, and I can't live with the guilt another day." His voice cracked. "Meet me at the old shipping warehouse by the docks in 1 hour. Come alone. I'll know if you're followed." The line went dead. Ilara's heart was hammering. "The docks? It's completely deserted at night. It feels like an ambush." "It's the perfect place for an ambush," Marcus agreed. "But it's also the perfect place for someone who is genuinely terrified and needs to stay hidden." He looked at her, his face a mixture of caution and desperate hope. "It's your call, Ilara." She thought of the fire, of her sister's lost job, of the fear in Vanessa's eyes. They had nothing left to lose. "We go." They parked 2 blocks away and approached the hulking, derelict warehouse on foot, sticking to the shadows. A single dim light glowed from a grimy second-story window. As they got closer, a voice called out from the darkness of a loading bay. "Over here." Alistair Finch looked like a man on the run. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his face was pale and gaunt. He quickly ushered them inside the cavernous, dusty space. In a small, dilapidated office, lit by a single battery-powered lantern, he opened a sleek laptop. "I've been watching you," he said, his hands trembling as he typed. "I saw what you were doing, gathering the workers, going to the media. I was praying you would succeed." He looked up, his eyes haunted. "I helped Richard Devereaux cook the books, create the shell companies, pay the bribes. I was a coward and I was greedy." "Why are you helping us now?" Ilara asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Because 6 months ago I discovered what their new venture was." Alistair turned the laptop toward them. The screen was filled with encrypted transaction logs. "They started laundering money, not just their own ill-gotten gains, money for international cartels, drugs, human trafficking, things that make wage theft look like child's play. When I told Richard I wanted out, he threatened my family. He showed me a file they had on my son, a fabricated crime that would send him to prison for the rest of his life." Marcus leaned in, his lawyer's eyes scanning the data. "These are offshore transfer records?" "It's everything," Alistair said. Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every blackmail payment for the last 15 years. I've been secretly downloading and backing up their entire server for months. He pulled out a small encrypted hard drive. This is a complete mirror of their system. The originals have a self-destruct protocol if the servers are ever breached by law enforcement, but this copy is firewalled. They can't touch it. Ilara took the hard drive. It felt impossibly heavy. Why not just go to the FBI yourself? I did, Alistair said, a bitter twist to his mouth. I went to the local field office. Turns out the agent in charge is Richard Devereaux's brother-in-law. I barely got out of there alive. He began packing his laptop. But you too. You've built a movement from the ground up. You've inspired people to speak out. With this evidence, and with the testimonies you've gathered. A car engine rumbled to life somewhere outside. Alistair went rigid with fear. I have to go. They're hunting me. He thrust a piece of paper into Marcus's hand. That's the contact for a U.S. attorney in Washington, I trust. She's been looking for a way to get at the Devereaux for years, but she needs something that originates outside of their sphere of influence. This is her chance. He shouldered his bag. Be careful. And watch out for Genevieve. Richard is a thug, but she's the snake. She's the one who is truly ruthless. He vanished out a back door into the darkness, leaving them alone in the dusty office. Ilara looked at the hard drive, then at Marcus. You know what this means, don't you? She said, her voice a whisper. We're not just fighting a corrupt family anymore. We're fighting a global criminal organization. Marcus's expression was grim, but his eyes shone with a new, steely resolve. Then we give the U.S. attorney the evidence she needs to burn their whole world to the ground. The main reading room of the Sterling Point Public Library was their new, anonymous command center. Surrounded by the quiet hum of students and retirees, Ilara and Marcus worked feverishly on a library computer, uploading the contents of Alistair's hard drive to a secure server controlled by the U.S. attorney in Washington. It's all here, Ilara whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. Every bribe, every laundered dollar, every threat. There are even audio recordings of Richard Devereaux planning the arson on your house. Marcus nodded, his face grim. The U.S. Attorney's Office is preparing the warrants, but she said we need to do one more thing to ensure the local authorities can't tip off the Devereaux. We have to create a public distraction. Something so loud and so public they can't ignore it, forcing the Fed's hand to move in immediately. Ilara's hand hovered over the keyboard. They had drafted a statement, a digital manifesto, combining her personal story with the irrefutable evidence of the Devereaux' crimes. It included the original video of her humiliation, testimonies from dozens of workers, and key documents from Alistair's drive. Are you sure about this? Marcus asked gently. Once we release this, your face and your name will be everywhere. You'll be the center of the storm. Ilara looked at a picture on her phone of her smiling sister, who had just been forced to take a low-paying job in another state. She thought of Marcus's ruined home, of Vanessa's terrorized family, of all the workers who had suffered in silence for years. I'm sure, she said, and clicked post. They unleashed a digital firestorm. The statement, video, and evidence were simultaneously posted to every social media platform imaginable. Emails with the full data dump were sent to every national news outlet and civil rights organization they could find. They activated their network of workers, who began sharing the posts, creating a tidal wave of public attention. Within 30 minutes, it was trending. Tour Devereaux scandal. Justice for Ilara. The first major news network broke the story. Billionaire family's criminal empire exposed by Maid they forced to act like a dog. Look, Marcus said, pointing to his tablet. The video of Ilara was going viral, but this time it wasn't an object of mockery. It was a symbol of resistance. Comments poured in by the thousands, expressing outrage, demanding justice, and sharing personal stories of workplace abuse. The quiet of the library was suddenly punctuated by news alerts pinging on phones all around them. Ilara pulled up a national news site and saw her own face staring back at her from the front page. "CNN is going live with it," Marcus breathed. "And look at this. The FBI just issued a press release. They are opening a federal investigation into Devereaux Industries." Ilara read the words, her vision blurring with tears. "The Bureau takes these allegations with the utmost seriousness. A full-scale investigation is now underway. We encourage any other victims to come forward." Their phones began to ring off the hook. The National Organization for Women offered legal support. The ACLU pledged to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of the workers. A message came in from Alistair Finch. "Well done. Stay safe. Justice is coming." They left the library and drove to a small church on the edge of town, the one Leo had told them about. Inside, in the basement meeting room, 24 workers were waiting. When Ilara and Marcus walked in, the room erupted in applause. Vanessa, the journalist, was there, having driven all night to be with them. She hugged Ilara fiercely. "I'm so sorry I faltered," she whispered. "But you didn't. You magnificent, brave woman, you did it." A small television in the corner was tuned to a live news report from outside the Devereaux mansion. The estate was surrounded by a sea of news vans and federal law enforcement vehicles. An FBI agent was at a podium, announcing the arrests of Richard and Genevieve Devereaux and the freezing of all their assets. "Look at them all scurrying away," Maria laughed, pointing at the screen as luxury cars sped away from the Devereaux' neighborhood. Their powerful friends were abandoning them. Marcus raised a styrofoam cup of coffee. "To Ilara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who reminded us all that one person's courage can change the world." "To all of us," Ilara corrected, her eyes scanning the faces of the brave men and women who had risked everything to stand with her. They were no longer just co-workers. They were a family, forged in the fires of injustice. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ilara allowed herself to truly smile. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, cleansing relief. She knew the legal battles were just beginning, but in this moment, in this small church basement, surrounded by her army, she felt an unshakable sense of victory. The sun was setting on the reign of the Devereaux, and a new day was dawning in Sterling Point. The courtroom was a theater of justice, and today it was sold out. Every seat was filled with the workers, their families, and a swarm of reporters. The flash of cameras was incessant as Ilara and Marcus walked to the front row, a quiet confidence radiating from them. Judge Althea Ramirez, a woman known for her sharp intellect and intolerance for corruption, struck her gavel, and a hush fell over the room. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented by the United States Attorney's Office," Judge Ramirez began, her voice resonating with authority, "this court formally dismisses all charges against Mr. Marcus Thorne. He is fully exonerated." A wave of applause swept through the gallery. Marcus closed his eyes, a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. "Furthermore," the judge continued, her gaze settling on Ilara, "this court commends the extraordinary courage of Ms. Ilara Vance. Her actions were instrumental in dismantling a significant criminal enterprise that has plagued this community for years. All retaliatory legal actions filed against her are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The applause was even louder this time. Maria and Rosa were openly weeping with joy. The assets of the Devereaux family and their associated entities, valued at over $1 billion, will remain seized by the federal government, the judge announced. A substantial portion of these assets will be used to establish a restitution fund for all employees who were victims of wage theft and other labor violations. The news was met with gasps of shock, and then an explosion of celebratory cheers. Mr. Johnson, a gardener who had worked for the Devereaux for 40 years, covered his face with his hands, overcome with the thought of a secure retirement he had never dreamed possible. Judge Ramirez looked directly at Ilara. "Ms. Vance, the court would like to offer you the opportunity to make a statement." Ilara walked to the podium, her steps steady. She looked out not at the judge or the cameras, but at the faces of the people she had fought alongside. "A few weeks ago," she began, her voice quiet but unwavering, "I was made to feel like I was less than human, for the amusement of people who believed their wealth made them gods. They thought that because we served them, we were beneath them." She shook her head. "Wealth doesn't determine a person's worth. Integrity does, compassion does, and courage does. Today, courage won." The room was silent, hanging on her every word. "The Devereaux hurt hundreds of people. They didn't just steal our wages. They tried to steal our dignity. They corrupted our town and thought they were untouchable." Her voice rose with passion. "But they forgot the most important thing. They forgot that we are a community. They forgot that when we stand together, our voices are louder than their money. They forgot that in this country, justice is not for sale." The courtroom erupted. Judge Ramirez let the applause continue for a full minute before restoring order. "This victory is not the end," Ilara concluded. "It is the beginning. It is a promise that we will build a new Sterling Point, a community where every worker is treated with respect, where the powerful are held accountable, and where no one is ever made to feel invisible again. To everyone who was brave enough to speak up, to my friend Marcus who stood by me when I had no one, and to every person watching this who has ever been afraid to fight back, stand up, speak out, stand together." It was a standing ovation. As reporters shouted questions, Ilara turned and hugged Marcus, a long, heartfelt embrace that spoke of shared trauma and shared triumph. They had faced down a monster and won. Outside the courthouse, under the bright, clear sky, they were mobbed by well-wishers. But through the crowd, Ilara saw Tristan Devereaux being led to a separate hearing in juvenile court. His face was sullen, stripped of its usual arrogance. For a brief second, their eyes met. There was no remorse in his gaze. Only the baffled fury of a prince who had just discovered his crown was made of cardboard. And in that moment, Ilara felt no anger, no hatred, only a quiet, profound pity. He had all the money in the world, but he was utterly bankrupt in spirit. She, on the other hand, had found a wealth he would never understand. 1 year later, a cool autumn breeze rustled the leaves of the young trees in the Sterling Point Community Park. Where the cold, imposing Devereaux mansion once stood, there was now a sprawling public garden, a playground, and a beautiful new building with glass walls, the Vance Thorne Center for Worker Justice. Ilara stood at a podium on the lawn, addressing a joyful crowd at the center's 1-year anniversary celebration. "A year ago, this ground was a monument to greed," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "Today, it is a testament to what we can build when we work together, a place for healing, for learning, and for empowerment." The past year had been a whirlwind. After the Devereaux were sentenced to long prison terms, Ilara and Marcus had used their portion of the court-ordered settlement to establish the non-profit foundation. It provided free legal aid, job training, and advocacy for workers facing exploitation. Marcus, who had renewed his law license, watched from the front row, a proud smile on his face. He now led the center's legal team, a quiet warrior fighting battles for others in courtrooms instead of gardens. The town itself had been reborn. The corrupt officials were gone, replaced by a new generation of public servants elected on platforms of transparency and reform. The restitution fund had changed hundreds of lives, allowing families to buy homes, send their kids to college, and escape the cycle of debt. The community garden, tended by many of the former Devereaux staff, supplied fresh produce to local food banks. "But our work isn't just in Sterling Point," Elara continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. Our story has inspired others. We've helped workers in 10 different states form unions, file lawsuits, and win back billions in stolen wages. We've shown them that change is possible. After the ceremony, Elara walked with Marcus through the garden. Children's laughter from the playground replaced the ghostly echoes of cruel party guests. "Ready for the trip to D.C. next week?" Marcus asked. Elara had been asked to testify before Congress about new federal legislation to protect whistleblowers. "As ready as I'll ever be," she smiled. "It's funny, a year ago I was terrified to even speak to my boss. Now I'm yelling at senators." "That's because you found your voice, Elara," he said softly. "You just needed to know someone was listening." They stopped at a simple granite bench near the rose bushes, the same kind Marcus used to tend. A small bronze plaque was affixed to it. It read, "In honor of those who speak truth to power, your courage is contagious." A young woman approached them tentatively, clutching a piece of paper. "Excuse me, are you Elara Vance?" "I am," Elara said kindly. "My name is Sarah. I work at a hotel downtown," the woman said, her voice trembling. "My manager, he's been doing things, illegal things, to all of us. We've been too scared to say anything, but then we heard about you." She held out the paper, a list of names and grievances. Can you help us?" Elara looked from the young woman's hopeful, frightened face to Marcus. He gave a slight, encouraging nod. Elara took the paper from Sarah's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong, the sound of a promise being made. "Tell me everything. We'll help you." What an incredible story of courage. If you were inspired, please share this video with someone who needs to see it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter, and check out these 2 other videos I've picked just for you. Thanks for watching, and remember, one voice can indeed change the world.